Welcome back to the Social Impact Level Up podcast. This is where we blur the lines between business, nonprofit, and impact. I'm your host, Wendy V, and I'm a social impact strategist here to help you build a successful and sustainable legacy of social change. In this week's episode, we're going to hear from a social entrepreneur who has been on a journey to change the world just like you. If you are interested in social entrepreneurship, this is the place for you. Let's jump right into this week's episode. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Social Impacts Level Up podcast. I'm Wendy V, your host, and I'm here today with Rick Ornelas, and he is going to tell us all about how he sparks change. It's really interesting because we found each other online and quickly became friends. We realized that we have a similar lingo, a similar outlook, and also probably very similar interests, like traveling.
Yeah.
So lots of things that we've bonded over. And I just wanted to give him space to come on the podcast to share the wonderful things that he's doing and how he transforms lives every single day. We'll talk a little bit about how he's transformed his own life. And we'll also talk more about the journey that he's been on for the last few years to make sure that people have the space that they need so that they can create transformation for others. So Rick, let's jump right into it. I want you to introduce yourself to our audience and tell us all the wonderful things that you've been up to.
Well, fantastic. First off, thank you so much, Wendy, for having me on your show. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. And you're right, what you were saying about we quickly connected with all the similar things that you mentioned. And, I believe that we connect with people that we were meant to connect with. So, that was truly a blessing. But as far as me, I'm an ultimate success coach, a bestselling author, the founder of iSpark Change, as you mentioned. And my life is all about loving and giving and serving others, and I'm a father and a family man, and those are the most important things for me. And everything I do is focused around those few things that I mentioned.
And I love it because you've involved all of those things in the journey that you're on. And so it's nice to see you be able to have time with your family, to do things that you enjoy, and then also know how you're still giving back to your community that you've created. So let's talk a little bit about iSpark Change, because this is a really cool concept to me. And I'm curious how you got started with this idea to create a space for other change agents, and how you kind of got into being a coach or a transformation. I forgot what is the word that you said?
Ultimate success coach.
Ultimate success coach. I was like, I knew I'm
Coach.
saying something wrong here. It's got like the pinnacle of
Just transformation, whatever. I mean, they
yeah.
all kind of go in line, but it's interesting because so my path is, I won't say it's unique. It's unique to me, but I didn't really have the kind of linear path to coaching as a lot of people take. And even the creation of iSpark Change was just not something that I'd ever planned. But I had, throughout my career, I'd worked in corporate for over 20 years, and I helped build a couple startups. And then after, one startup that we had built very rapidly in a period of less than 2 years, only to see it all come crashing down, that started me, after that, I left that and said, you know what, I really don't want to go through this again or really work with anyone else. I think I've learned a lot and I can help others. So I decided to start coaching and business coaching, and initially first in the healthcare sector, because that's the space I worked in. But that kind of evolved over the years. That was at the end of 2015. So it's just past 7 years, and that evolved over the years. But when 2020 hit and the pandemic started and my business had slowed down, a lot of my clients had asked to put their services on hold or to stop altogether. I found myself with a bunch of time on my hands, like a lot of us, a bunch of time and at home and in quarantine. And at first that was a pretty fearful time for me because I was worried about what the future was, going to hold, and not having that control that so many of us like to have, that illusion that we have control over, our future and our lives. But realizing I didn't have that. And so I was kind of worried. And then I realized that I was in a much better place than other individuals. People were dying, people were hurt, people were losing their homes, and that I was in the position that I needed to practice some of the things that I had been, um, working on over the years, like giving to others and serving others and being grateful And so I decided to focus on, like, dive into that, into focusing on supporting others, right? And not making it about me, but about focusing on others. And so I started by, doing that in like volunteering and doing it in a small scale. And then I started to write my book, 12 Hours of Heaven, Lessons for a Better World. That had been in my head for 20 years, but it was something I always put off because of not having the time. So I started to write that. And in the journey of writing that book, um, the theme of sparking change is something that came to me, that I really wanted to. I kind of wove throughout the book. And when I was about, I went through, started writing. I'd never written a book. So I started writing just very methodically, right? Just writing 500 plus words a day and writing every day at the same time. And then after a period of a couple months, that all really changed. And so my writing flourished. I felt, and not to get too, spiritual here on your podcast, but I felt as if, God was kind of giving me the story, and I was just typing, and I started writing over 2,000 words in a day. And that's when I felt that I was called to do more than just write a book, that I was called to create more. And that's where I Spark Change was born. I was waking up at all hours of the night with a bunch of ideas, and just a flood of creativity and ideas. And that's where the idea for I Spark Change was born, one night at probably 3 a.m. And then after the idea came, I said, I really need to do something with this. So after the book um, came out in October of 2020, then I quickly went to work on building iSpark Change. So I, you know, created the organization, created the social media, at the end of 2020. And I mean, that's how it all got started, was just because of the idea that was, sparked in me from writing the book.
There's so much rich value in what you were saying. I mean, particularly the idea of moving away from a career that no longer served you, but then also following like the divine inspiration of what is your calling, what is your passion, what makes you, what drives you. These are common themes actually in the podcast. It's really interesting to
Yeah.
hear in a lot of social entrepreneurs that, a lot of people say that I don't want to get too spiritual, but I was called to do this for a particular purpose, or something told me to, and I just followed my intuition. And I think that we talk about that a lot on this podcast because people who do step out on blind faith need to have kind of a sense of bravery to do so. And I think
Mhm.
just like what you're saying, the pandemic was a very scary time for a lot of people, and uncertainty about, business you just started out of your passion. I could see that being really, something you had to navigate. And so now with the entire set of things you've created, the podcast, the community, the book, all of the things that you've created, you're kind of like in that middle of the journey. You're not no longer sort of in the beginning. You're more towards the middle of the journey, which is great because a lot of the times we hear from people, at all stages of their entrepreneurship journey. And in this phase that you're in now, what are your priorities? Like what's most important to you right now?
That's a really good question. That's a really good question, Wendy. And something that I honestly, that I think about on a weekly basis, on a daily basis, even. Because, as an entrepreneur and coaching a lot of entrepreneurs, I see this all the time, and I've seen it in myself. As an entrepreneur, a lot of us, as entrepreneurs, and a lot of us get kind of the squirrel syndrome, where, we're working on something, or shiny object syndrome. You're working on something, and then something comes, oh, I need to start a podcast. Oh, I need to do this. Oh, I need to do that. And then you kind of lose focus on the things that are most important for, what's really driving your purpose, or really, living in that passion that you were talking about. And so initially with Ice Park Change, I wasn't clear, right? I was trying to figure it all out. My some of my old clients came back, and so I was trying to run that old business at the same time, and felt like being pulled apart in two different directions. And then I spoke to a friend of mine who had, was kind of helping me along, and she said, that it's really all the same. Really, you're supporting others, you're helping to make them better, you're coaching, you're working on, positive change and social impact. Like, it's really all one and the same. And so that's when I, shifted my focus and said, okay, I'm going to do everything through iSpark Change, whether it's my coaching, or whether it's speaking or whatever it is, it's all going to be through iSpark Change because I see the different things that I do, like the things you mentioned, I see them all as spreading positive change, all as having a positive impact on others. And so to get back to your question, what I'm really focused on now and what's the priority is really sticking to that purpose of, loving and giving and serving others and positive change and social impact. And really putting everything through that filter of saying, okay, does the podcast support that? Does it help to grow the community? Does it help to spread positive change? Does it help to, make others better, create impact? Does being on your podcast support all that? Yes, 100%. And so as I plan my weeks, as I plan my days, I've really had to hone everything in and not get thrown all over the place, but really focus and say, okay, do these really support those big goals that I have for iSpark Change? And we have some huge goals for iSpark Change and some things that we're working on that we're kind of going to those next phases, like you've said. We're not at the very beginning; we're a little farther along. And so, I have to be very cognizant of, okay, what am I going to say yes to? What am I going to focus on? But they're all around, supporting iceberg change, supporting the growth of the community, and helping others and spreading that positive change.
That's really cool, and I know exactly what you're talking about with the shiny object squirrel syndrome because it's so easy to be inspired by all of the ideas and get overwhelmed by them, and a lot of the people I work with, that's some of the very first things we have to do is cull through all of those many ideas and prioritize and like you said, find a focus, but make sure that focus is still aligned with what is the bigger vision, what is the passion, what is the change you're trying to make, and how that is the vehicle for the impact that you want to see. And I
Yeah.
think that that's a really great way to describe your journey also is kind of putting that priority in place. It's great to see that you get from that early stage to a later stage and you're able to still then realign the priorities with whatever your vision is or whatever your focus is. And I think that's a great message too, because sometimes we let the work carry us in another direction and we
Yeah.
don't maybe go back and realign with what was the purpose that we created this for in the first place.
Yeah. And I think it's important to amplify, what you were just saying, Wendy, is that, as I mentioned, putting everything through that filter, if you will, of, going back to your purpose and going back to your passion. And, if there's any entrepreneurs that are listening, I mean, I would recommend to them that they figure out what those things are for them. If it's the one, two, maybe three at the most, that are super important that they want to, that they're all about, right? What's the purpose? Why are they here? What are they hoping to accomplish? And really make sure that everything they're doing supports that.
Hey, absolutely. And I love the idea of, keeping your focus too, because it is really difficult as an entrepreneur when you have the charge of your time and you're giving yourself the tasks or you're giving others the tasks, before in other environments in the past or in corporate or wherever you were before. I'm sure people were giving you work that you are almost responding to a lot of the time. But now you're the person who's giving the work out and you have a team and you have all of these things. So how did you make this shift? And this is actually going back to a season one episode we had called Employee to Boss. How
Okay.
did you make that part of the shift for yourself in your journey from I'm part of another organization to now I am the creator of an organization in charge of this organization? What was that mentality or the mindset that you went through in that journey?
Another excellent question, Wendy. I think for me, it was definitely a journey. It was definitely a process, and it took a while. It took a lot of learning. I'd say, a few years even. I'm at 7 years, and I'd say probably the first two, three, I was figuring all that out, right? I was just figuring it all out, and I had a partner that I was working with, so we could bounce things off of one another, and we could support one another. So that was very helpful, being in that journey. And I think the advantage, I'll say it as an advantage because I truly believe it was an advantage. I think the advantage that I had, and more so even than my partner, because he's since gone back and is, rejoined corporate and is now back in that role. The advantage that I had is that while I never, while I was younger and everything, I never was an entrepreneur, right? I didn't come from a family of entrepreneurs or anything like that. I mean, my parents didn't own their own businesses or anything like that. However, I always had that entrepreneurial spirit, as they say. I always felt as if, I always was put in leadership roles. I always was someone that was big on personal development and learning and growing. And I always was I still am like an outside the box thinker. And it's interesting because, thinking back now, there were times in my corporate career where that posed challenges, where, I was thinking bigger than my role, let's say. I was thinking bigger than my role. And then, my boss is like, hey, you need to rein things in here because, this is your role and you're thinking of all these, this global stuff and all this vision and everything. So it's kind of a visionary and everything. And even we do like, in corporate, as you do like these personality assessments and all these things. And they're like, oh, you're a maverick, you're a visionary. And I would always get those, you know, classifications. Right. And so many times people were trying to like, not like, not bring me down, but, but you understand what I'm saying. I can see by your body language. So you just,
It was the big fish, small pond syndrome that I've
yeah,
lived with the entire life. Yeah.
yes. And so you know exactly what we're talking about. So people were always trying to like, okay, rein it in a little bit. Right. So where I'm going with this is that when I started working for myself, being the boss, if you will, being the CEO, running the show, um, it was very liberating because it's like, okay, I just have to answer to myself, always answer to God, but just answer to myself. My business partner, make sure we're in alignment, and we were very much in alignment. So that was never an issue. That was always great. Um, and and it wasn't, like, oh, I need to check with someone and everything. No, I did have to check with my clients and stuff. And that was part of that learning process for those 2, 3 years. Make sure I was supporting them in the way that they needed to be supported. And that was, growth in that area. But, I'd say the big thing was just that I always had that in me. And so, it was just a opportunity to let it flourish and then kind of figure out what it was going to look like.
Yeah, I was just reminiscing on when I was told that I was a big fish in a small pond, as you said that. And I just laughed because I could hear the same thing for you. Just the idea that people don't have the same vision and the ability to skip 5 steps ahead and then work backwards to the solution, or go from big picture to small detail and then back up to big picture in the same conversation. Those types of skills that you and I clearly have, the
Yeah.
both of us are able to follow each other. It's, I think, sometimes daunting for other people, to be honest. And I think
Yeah.
sometimes in those types of very controlled work environments where you have a hierarchy and a chain of command and policies and procedures and all these other things, out of the box thinkers are scary. They're not something to just kind of like let go off on their own, because
Yeah.
you really need to, you do get this sense of people like constantly trying to rein you into this, whatever it is they want you to be. And it doesn't give you the freedom, like you mentioned with entrepreneurship. And then when you make that transition, it can almost be a little overwhelming because you're like, oh, I'm free.
Yeah.
Almost, I
Yeah.
think of it like a jack in a box.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm like a caged animal, you open the door and I'm like running all wild and they're like, just kind of go down the path, on the savannah, like it's running crazy. And, one thing that's even interesting, I think, to point out is that, so I mentioned how I helped grow a couple startups. Well, so startup, if you've worked in startups or, for anyone that's familiar, there's it's constant change, it's constant growth. It's like shift on a dime, everything's moving at 100 miles an hour. And it even became a challenge in those arenas because, like you said, being able to shift back and forth the thinking and the visionary and 5 steps ahead and everything that even became a challenge because not everybody thinks that way. And not everybody can see, see that way. And that's okay, right? I mean, every organization needs people in different roles. But even that caused me to, in one of the startups, that caused me to, started out as executive VP of sales and marketing and then became the CEO of another business that we had acquired. And then we had an overall CEO of the organization. And that caused us to butt heads because, we were both visionaries. We're both seeing things, probably 20 steps ahead. Right. And his 20 steps were different from my 20 steps, and then that caused us, to butt heads and some friction and everything. Whereas the other people that were on the leadership team, they were just kind of, they weren't those thinkers. So they were just, okay, well, how do we follow? Like, which way do we go? And they're just looking for direction. And yeah, it even caused some strife there.
Yeah, I can picture in my head how that would cause strife when you have people who are not in sync with the where those 20 steps are. Like
Yeah.
what is that journey that we're gonna go on between here and there? And it's two completely different plans. And then you're like, wait a second. And I
So
appreciate the idea of the personality, assessment that you mentioned earlier too, that there's like these categories of people and there's different people in environments and everybody's gifts and talents are necessary to balance each other. But we
yeah,
also have to be, cognizant of power imbalances and, gender differences and all these other things that come into play in different work environments. So I can imagine in a high stress environment like a startup, any little thing could also set off into the wrong direction or a spiraling direction or a set of activities that weren't even necessary. And so how did you navigate and even knowing, some of the high level roles that you've played in the past, how did you navigate the ability to stay I don't want to say a positive leader, but an emotionally intelligent leader or a leader who, now with the learned lessons that you learned, was there anything you would do different in your leadership? Let's talk a little bit more about, what does it look like in these impact spaces to be a leader?
yeah, I'd say that that was definitely challenging. And the way that I, maintained that positive leadership was sticking true to who I was and my ethics and my morals and, my beliefs, my purpose, like I said, loving and giving and serving others and holding true to that no matter what. And then practicing emotional intelligence. And that's hard in all situations, especially when, emotions can run high and, people have differing opinions and everything. But what kept me grounded, what kept me on that right path was always staying true to who I was. And staying true to what I felt was the in the best interest of the organization, whatever it was, right? Whether it was a startup, a corporate or my was staying true to what I felt was in the best interest of the organization. And, even to use this, the example of, where I would butt heads with that CEO, even later after, a year later, like after we'd parted ways and everything, it was probably a year, 18 months later. He even sent me a message and said something to that effect is that you meaning me always had the best interest of, the organization in heart. And you were always trying to do the whatever was best for organization and everything, and that he had appreciated that, and that he kind of couldn't see that, at the time. And I share that just to say that, not for any sort of vindication, but to say that I believe if, you know, all of us as individuals and as entrepreneurs, if we hold true to, okay, this is who I am, these are the fundamental tenets that I live by, and I'm not going to deviate, from that no matter the situation, right? Even if it means like, oh, I could go over here and then I'm going to make $1 million, whatever. But no, if we stay true to who we are, then I don't think we can go wrong, in a situation.
I am so glad you ended where you did because the next thing I was going to ask you about was the money guided situation. And so you went right into it. And I'm like, gosh, we're so in sync. How do you navigate that when you're sharing and coaching others that they need to follow their purpose and maybe not necessarily a incentive like money, but I mean, there could be other incentives, of course, but how do you stay true to your purpose versus maybe deviating onto a road that moves you away from your purpose, but it's could be quite lucrative?
What the way I do it for me, and it's come up many times, and the way I coach others is always understanding what that purpose is, what that why is from day one. So then it's never a question because you always have that guiding post to, to lead your way, right? Where I've seen people get into difficulties is where they're really not clear on what their why is. Oh, I don't know what I want to accomplish. I don't know what the goals are for my organization. I'm not clear on what my goals are for myself or where I want to be in 5 years or what have you. And it's not to say that you have to know, hey, this is the exact path and that's how I'm going to go and this is the way I'm going to get there. But if you have a clear idea of, okay, fundamentally, I'm about serving others. Fundamentally, I'm about giving, right? Those are going to be my guideposts, no matter what path I'm on, right? And so I always help people to say, okay, what is your why? What is that purpose? And even if they're not super clear, okay, then what are the things that you're looking to accomplish now? So let's say, what's a goal that is your most important goal for this year? Okay, then let's put everything through that filter of, all right, like I said earlier, does it support that goal and stay true to, does going off and doing this program that, yes, maybe it'll make me a bunch of money, but does it support going where you want to head, right? And I had to learn that the hard way. I'd be completely honest. I had to learn that the hard way of taking all these detours and going like this, when if I had learned that early, I would have had that more clear linear path. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs, they do that. They take that crazy path like this, whereas it can be much quicker. And the some of the greats, some of the business leaders, the people that have been very successful, some of the ultra successful people, they learn that early, like the Warren Buffetts or Steve Jobs, they learn that real early and then they're able to get there much quicker than the rest of us.
Yeah, and I think you also have so many, as an entrepreneur, competing sets of information that you can access, whether that's information from YouTube, coaches, programs, courses. Like you can invest in any number of things to try to shortcut that path, but in the end, it's still going to have to be your path. So
Mhm.
it's kind of like, yeah, stay linear and stay focused, but a lot of the times, some of those detours, there was a lesson you actually kind of needed to learn on that detour. And so it's hard, on the one hand, yeah, you definitely want the shortest shortcuts, but then sometimes you think you're taking a shortcut and it's not not a
Yeah.
shortcut at all.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you end up
Completely.
down the road.
Yeah. Totally. And you're right about, even though I have had that, crazy path, I have gotten to where, um, I'm grateful for all those experiences. Learn from, take something away from every experience, even if I'm like, wow, that was a stupid decision. But what did I learn from it? Right? What did I take away from it? What can I use to, support me moving forward? Because I mean, I tell, every one of the big topics on when I speak is that, fear or failure is the best teacher that we have in life. And so many people are afraid to fail that they end up not taking chances or not, not veering off the path and, taking that detour and saying, "Oh, maybe I will take that chance that it is going to, give me a shortcut, right? And I'll come out ahead, by doing that. And, and so, I do see those mistakes, if you will, or those wrong turns or whatever. I do see them as opportunities to grow and learn, and become better.
And we talk about a lot in this podcast too, having a growth mindset as an entrepreneur, making sure that the value you find in the journey is also nested in the idea that you learn something from those experiences and not necessarily just continuing on in the same manner and expecting different outcomes. But really, like you said, reflecting, thinking about, being grateful for, with a new understanding and shedding light on the past, how can I move forward with lessons that I've learned? And so what kind of, things do you use, what tools do you use to keep you in that growth mindset and to keep you moving forward in a kind of positive way?
Um, I have maybe embarrassing, but I use a lot of tools. I mean, I have so many, but on a daily basis, I read scripture in the morning. I journal gratitude in the morning. Those are the first things that I'll do. I'll read scripture. I'll journal gratitude. I'll read um, some personal development kind of material book there. Um, and then at the end of the day, I will do the same thing, go through the same thing. And I also I've had the day planned out. So I have the day planned out either most of the time the evening before, but sometimes in the morning. And then I'll kind of recap, what I've learned, what I accomplished, those type of things. Again, the journaling, the gratitude and the positivity. And I, I I look at it as, that we are in today's world, we are constantly bombarded, constantly, and most people are in a state of constant distraction. We're constantly bombarded from, social media and the media and a million dings and pings and requests all day long that we can easily, stray off track. And those type of practices help to keep me grounded, to keep me positive. It's easy to, someone sends you, it could be benign, right? They could send you some joke that they send you on social media and some funny video and you click on it, but maybe you don't think it's as funny as they do. And you take offense to it. And then it's easy to, go down that path of then, now you're offended. Now you're in a negative mood. Now you're, it's kind of poisoned your day. And so I'm very cautious of the input that I receive, whether it's from what I read or what I watch or, what I view or who I connect with and everything. Because I like, as one of my mentors says, I like keeping my glass, crystal clear of, it's like a glass of water that is crystal clear, purified, ultra pure, and not letting all these impurities and all these toxins and everything come in. That's just going to, be poison for me, but keeping everything, keeping um, really diligent check on all of that to make sure that, you know, I'm, I'm not getting influenced in the wrong way, in a negative way.
Yeah, and you talked about boundaries before too with your time and what commitments you make. And then this is another great boundary of what inputs come in, whether that's people or material, reading, posts, all that kind of stuff. I think that boundaries are really important for us as entrepreneurs because sometimes we we can like let our boundaries down and then find ourselves, like you said, spinning in that cycle of wasting time or procrastinating or going down a path that we shouldn't go down.
Mhm.
There's a lot of ways that boundaries keep us safe. So always practice healthy boundaries, people. No is a complete answer. It's
Yeah. Oh,
absolutely okay to
totally.
say no.
Yeah. Yeah. Completely. And yeah, it's something I've had to, and it's interesting because my wife, Tonya, she's very much a people pleaser. And, we've talked about this a lot about, she's worked on her boundaries and everything because always wanting to say yes, always wanting to, give to others and everything. And, and I used to be that way, when I was younger. And then I've become much more diligent about, look, you have to protect those boundaries because, you know, just, not just for your time's sake, but even for, your mental sake because, that can be totally deterred by something and just totally change your day, change your outlook, change your week. And so you got to be really cautious of that, especially, more so today than, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. I mean, yeah, so much more.
And as social entrepreneurs, you mentioned something in there. People always want to serve more or to give more. And sometimes it's difficult for us to take that time and say, no, I need to be almost selfish, but in a good way, because then you are able to show up and serve more and serve more wholly when you do show up. So what kinds of things do you do to replenish yourself and your well-being? I know you talked about a couple of the tools that keep you in the right mindset for entrepreneurship, but that's, probably only one facet of our holistic wellness. So what other types of things keep you in a space that you're able to physically show up and serve?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked, Winnie, because as you were as you were just, beginning what you were saying there, I was thinking about the saying, you can't pour from an empty cup, right? And so you need to make sure that your cup is full before you start pouring into others. And and those practices that I mentioned, I also meditate twice a day. So after I'll go through the journaling and the gratitude and the spirit, reading scripture and everything, then the next thing I'll do is I'll meditate. And the morning one is always first thing after those. After those things, then I'll meditate. The afternoon one sometimes it changes. It's not at the right before I go to bed because then kind of screws up your sleep if you meditate right before you sleep. But at least I found that. So I'll do that late in the afternoon or midday or lunchtime or something. Um, but the meditation I find I've been doing that now for not that long. I was practicing just kind of stillness and just thinking, which I do a lot. Um, like when I after that meditation, I'll go to the gym, and even on the way to the gym, which is like a 10-minute drive, no radio. I mean, it's just kind of me, my thoughts, maybe some prayer, things like that. But um, I I I think for a lot of people, and I learned this from Jim Quick, is that we give our day away too fast. We wake up and then we dive, and I used to be this person, dive right into our phone. You're going into email, you're going into everyone else's requests of you and everything. And all of a sudden, you've taken no time for yourself. So the first few hours of my day are protected for me. And so, after that meditation, I'll go to the gym, as I said, and I'll work out for, like an hour and a half. And it's just, I don't go there to socialize or anything. I mean, sure, you may say hi to people, whatever, but that's me time. I'll listen to a podcast and, you know, soak something in there. And the working out, I mean, that's always been a part of my life. I mean, I'm a CrossFit coach as a hobby, so I do that as well. Um, but that few, first few hours of the day, like 2, 3 hours of the day, that's the time for me to recharge. That's the time for me to, really fill my cup so I can, pour out the whole day. And then at the end of the day, it's the journaling, it's the gratitude, it's those things we talk about, the prayer, just to kind of clear your mind, to clear everything so you can sleep well. And, I mean, there's lots of other things we need I won't dive into, but supplements that I
Yeah.
take or, doing, hot cold therapy. I mean, there's so many other things that I do. I mean, I'm really big on a lot of these
But
apps,
it's
if you will, or things to make myself better.
Yeah, I think that the message though is you need a whole tool belt. You need to know what works for you in your tool belt. And for you, you have some very focused regiment things, but then you've also described to us things that like a lot of people go to the gym or might, and might think about CrossFit. I've always thought about CrossFit. I've not done it. But some of these other tools that you described, like having a meditation practice, having a journaling practice. Those are things that I think people let them go quickly because they're the first things to be like, oh, I don't have time to meditate, or I don't have time to journal, or
Mhm.
I don't want to wake up at 5 in the morning to do all this stuff before I start my day. And I've heard that from people before that they don't necessarily make this space in their life for these things. So I think what you're reminding us is to make this space because that space will create space for other things.
That's perfect. What you just said lastly, that is an exact perfect message for people to take away from this is that, um, and I, when people say, oh, I don't have time to work out, I don't have time to meditate, you don't have the time not to do it because what the reality is, as you said, you will create so much more space by taking that time for yourself. Even if, if it's not working out, if it's not meditation, if it's some other, if it's reading, if it's some other thing that someone wants to do, sit there and drink their coffee and, sit outside on their, patio or, in nature, whatever it is, it's time where you're essentially like that unplugged time, right? That time where it's just for yourself. And I have coached people that they're like, yeah, meditation's not my thing. Yeah, working's not my thing and all this. So for example, great. This is one of my favorite examples. So there's a chiropractor that I was coaching and he was like, man, he had two young babies at home. There was like both under the age of 2. And he was like, "Man, I'm here at the office from like 7 to 6 PM. I go straight home. It's bath time. It's reading with the kids. It's this. I barely get to eat and then I crash and I do it all over again. And I was like, here's what I want you to do. And I'm like, I want you to take 5 minutes, 5 minutes, just 5 minutes when you can do it in your car. I want you to sit in your car, either right when you get in your car and you leave the office or in your driveway and just sit there in stillness for 5 minutes. Okay. Not anyone else's time, no music, no nothing, just 5 minutes of you time, uninterrupted time. And I'm like, and if you can get another one in, like at lunch or in the morning, if you're not too rushed in the morning, then get another one in. He came back after doing this for like a month and he was like, oh my gosh, life changing, like the greatest thing that had ever happened to his life. And I've had multiple people that have, same kind of situation, same kind of success stories. He was like, oh my gosh, it was like that, just that time alone, that time of nothing, no sounds, no nothing, no one else, just for himself, completely changed his life. He had more energy, he had more focus, he was happier, right? His relationship was better. Like it helped in like 20 different areas just by doing that. So
And it's such a good example of how coaching transforms lives. I think sometimes I hear people saying like, coaching is, doesn't work, or I don't know, it seems weird, or it seems like something I don't want to invest in. I hear so many different things where people are reluctant to go through the process of coaching. But exactly what you described, that was something he could have done for himself, but he didn't give himself permission and space to do. That you were able to see it from an external perspective and say, this should be a priority because it will create transformation. And luckily, he trusted you and tried it.
yeah, amen.
Got
That's
the
exactly.
benefit. Yeah. So I wanted to ask you two more questions. The first one is really about if you could give a piece of advice to somebody who's earlier in the journey than you. We talked about in this episode that you're sort of more in the middle or like more seasoned as the social entrepreneur, but thinking of people still starting out early in the journey, what would be your biggest piece of advice to them as they're moving forward and they want to make an impact with either a business or a nonprofit that they're starting?
Is just to, and this will go back to what I was saying earlier, is to just know what they're wanting to accomplish. Right. So if they say, hey, I started this nonprofit for this reason, this is the why that I started this organization, know what that is, and then keep working towards that goal. And a lot of, this happened to me before as well, is that a lot of us, we set this goal. It's like, oh, climb that mountain. And then it's like, well, that's a huge mountain. Like it's going to take years. It's way too big. And then the goal becomes so big that we give up, like you said, right? Oh, meditate every day. Like, no, that's crazy. Like it's too big. Whereas, the biggest advice that I would give is just focus on today, right? Just focus on doing that goal, driving towards that goal today. What am I going to do today that's going to help me, one step up that mountain, right? And just when you just focus on that, it makes it so much more attainable. Um, and then when you look up, or look back 6 months down the road, a year down the road, 3 years down the road, you're like, oh wow, look how far I've gone, right? Look how far I've come, and look where the businesses or the organization or whatever I've created. Look how much I've created. And sure, you can look back along the way, right, and celebrate, your wins and your progress. That's super important too. But I'd say to just focus on, the day, right? Just focus on just what you need to do to kind of go that next.
Oh, that's wonderful because it aligns with two of the other themes we talk about a lot in this podcast, which is taking continual inspired action and also recognizing when you're living your vision. Because as
Yeah,
you said, there's
awesome.
parts where you don't even realize you got to a certain point of your vision and it wasn't where you started out, but you're just because it's today, you don't recognize that you've accomplished so much.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, so those are two more of them. So I'm excited to hear you just aligning with all the things that we talk about on this podcast. Thank you. It's almost like we planned it, but I can assure you guys we did it. And so, Rick, the last thing I want to ask you is really if people resonated with you, if they're interested in your coaching or your community or your podcast, all of the things that you do, the book, can you give a just like a 30-second infomercial for yourself about where people can find you and why they might want to work with you and where can they link with you after this podcast?
Well, first off, thank you for having me on the show, Wendy, and thank you for, asking that question because, I think that's important to kind of share our gifts with the world and what we've learned along our journey to help others. And it's real easy. I mean, they can either go to my name, rickornelas.com, and they can find out, if they're interested in coaching or speaking or anything like that. Or isparkchange.com, letter I, sparkchange.com. If you look on any platform, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, you'll find iSpark Change. And we're most active LinkedIn. We're most active on Instagram, where we have our biggest community and we have daily support and inspiration and everything. And in terms of, who might want to go to iSpark Change, if you're looking for, some positivity, if you're looking to make the world a better place, if you're looking to create impact or, and I use a very broad definition of social impact. I think I told you this before, is that, anyone that's kind of looking to make others better, to make the world a better place, in whatever they're doing, right? In their work and organization, their group. And so, um, if anyone's just like, hey, I'm about positivity, I'm about making the world better, I'm about, helping others, then Iceberg Change is going to be the place for them. They can join our community at icebergchange.com. They can follow us on social media. We're building the world's first social media platform to connect all these individuals together that, hopefully we have our beta version out later this year, but, you know, it's pretty easy to find us.
Yeah, and I agree. I found you guys, and that's how we got to be friends. So I'm
Great.
excited. Very approachable and very wonderful to work with you. And I'm excited about this app for sure. And the other thing I'll say about the work that you do is you're so organized about how things come out. It's just such a great brand. And so I just wanted to make sure that folks, if even if you, don't need coaching, you don't need a community, you don't need all these other things, just go look at Rick's brand. The Iceberg Change brand is a really solid brand. And it's a great example of a social impact brand that you've built as well. And I know you said the definition of social impacts that you use is very much aligned with what I use as well for my business. If you're making change, come find a home in someone's community who wants you to just continue to do that. That's all we want you to do is just continue to show up, do the work, and feel supported by whoever, whatever all coach you find that resonates best with you. And so that's why I'm super excited to have you come and talk about what you do on our platform with our community, because maybe there's some folks who can use the way that you do the work. So
Thank you.
Rick, yeah, no, I'm excited about everything you're doing too. So I'm looking forward to beta testing this out. I'm gonna put it out there into the universe and the world that I want to be the early adopter on this platform. So yeah, so thank you everybody for being here for this episode. We've been here with Rick Ornelas today, who's representing Iceberg Change, but also a whole body of wonderful work related to social impacts. We're super excited to have him as part of the collective and the community resources that we have available for folks. And we hope you enjoyed this episode. All right. Thanks for being here, Rick.
Yeah. Thank you so much, man. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. Take care. Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Social Impact Level Up podcast. It's been awesome to interview today's guest, and I hope that you leave inspired to take action. If you're looking for any of the information we spoke about, it's probably down in the show notes. Make sure that you're checking them out and you're clicking on any of the links that seem exciting to you. If you are looking for a coach or a consultant to help you with your social impact or your sustainability, reach out to me via my website, hop on my email list, or jump into one of my programs. All of the links are below. So excited to have you as part of the collective. Make sure that you come back and join us for another episode next week.